I'll be honest, when I first heard about Dulce Base, I thought it was just another internet legend about aliens and UFOs hiding underground somewhere in New Mexico. But then I started hearing insider testimony, military whistleblowers, and even real scientific attempts to figure out what's actually under that mesa. We're talking supposed underground labs, alien experiments, strange aircraft in the skies, and even leaked video that someone very clearly didn't want the public to ever see. So stick around and enjoy the video.
First off, we're going to talk about the Dulce Mesa because that's what we have queued up here, and it's too bad that Dr. 𝗩𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 is not here because this is primarily a lot of his work. I love giving credit where credit is due, so I just wanted to say that this was 𝗩𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘's brainchild. I was basically there to carry cameras and along for the ride and picking sites and negotiating with the Indians. So let me tell you about the Dulce Mesa first because I think this is revolutionary and this is what I'd like to present to you first, and then we'll get on with the with my field investigations. And then Area 51 we'll save for last. Does everyone know where the Dulce Archuleta Mesa is? You're all pretty familiar with where Dulce is? No. Okay, let me give you some background on the Dulce Archuleta Mesa. Anybody who's familiar with New Mexico, the Dulce Archuleta Mesa is approximately 60 miles southeast of Durango, Colorado, directly across the border. It's in between two towns called Lumberton and also Lumberton and Farmington, which forms a triangle between Lumberton, Farmington, and Durango. It's in the middle of a '𝗪𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 Apache Indian reservation. Now, the interesting thing about the Dulce Mesa is that for many, many years, through the late 60s and through most of the 70s, the Dulce Archuleta Mesa has been the backdrop for a huge number of very mysterious sightings and events. There's a farmer who lives on the 𝗪𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 Apache Indian Reservation, whose land was grandfathered by the Spanish in 1886, who has lost nearly 500 of his cattle. His name is Ed Gomez. This was really where the beginning of the modern cattle mutilation phenomenon began, was on Ed Gomez's ranch. Ed Gomez was the one who began to find cattle on his ranch with the eyes taken out, the reproductive organs taken out. The cattle had been stunned or zapped by some type of beam because the cattle, when they died quite literally in a running position as if they were frozen in that position. The sutures that were done, or the surgical incisions that were done on the cattle, were done with some type of medical laser because the cellular structure was not disrupted in the cows. Literally, the cells were pulled apart by the precision of the instrument. All of the blood was removed from these cows with no cardiovascular collapse, which of course is impossible for an animal that is going to bleed to death. Usually the capillaries and the arteries begin to collapse as the heart pumps. This was as if the cow was literally zapped or stunned. Every single ounce of fluid was removed somehow magically from the cows. The eyes, sometimes the tongue, sometimes the jawbone, the rectums of the cattle were cored out with some sort of special instrument, and then they were dropped from a height back on this fellow's farm. Now, when this began to come to public light was due to the efforts of a man by the name of Paul Bennewitz. Paul Bennewitz got involved originally when a prototype of one of our either B-1 or B-2 bombers crashed into the Dulce Mesa. And apparently this prototype was nuclear powered. It was powered with a plutonium pulse drive, and all the military was really concerned about was not covering up the radiation or doing anything about the radiation. All they were concerned about was just throwing a big tarp over it so nobody could see it from the air, which of course angered the Indians. Now, I had a lot of inside information on this given to me because my godfather is a fellow by the name of Harrison Jack Schmitt, who was the last man on the moon, and he was also at that time the U.S. Senator for New Mexico. Bennewitz, who worked for a company called the Thunder Corporation, began in his investigations to be harassed by government agents because of the spill, but also he began to get very unusual readouts on his computer. And Bennewitz actually claims that he was in contact with some form of alien intelligence that was coming to him from a computer that claimed to be based inside the Dulce Archuleta Mesa. Over the years between 1976 and about 1987 or so, Bennewitz had flown over the mesa and actually came up with a map of the various entrances for where the saucers could come and go from out of the mesa. Now, subsequent investigators have found 2 engineers who claim to have actually built the place in 1953. We interviewed 14 eyewitnesses who claimed that they went under hypnosis. These were women. A number of the women had little children as well who were also abducted along with them, and the children's psychological state was very, very severe. But in this investigation, these 14 eyewitnesses who claimed to have been abducted claimed to have actually been inside the Mesa. There's also a sort of legendary figure. We're not exactly sure he exists or not, but a fellow who is called Thomas C. by an investigator named Bill Hamilton. This fellow Thomas C. supposedly worked as a security guard inside the base and escaped in the late 1970s with a videotape that was 6 minutes of a security camera that basically ran back and forth over a large hall in which there were these ambionic sacks where there appeared to be actual aliens in the sacks and unusual devices on the walls. This videotape, the Japanese apparently now have. This is the kind of a controversy on this because Nippon Television supposedly found this individual. I will show you the physical tape, and then the Japanese have a very ingenious recreation that shows you all the colors and what have you, as guided by this fellow Thomas C. So the explanation behind this was that in 1953, supposedly some sort of deal was struck between the United States government and this particular group of aliens. We don't know which bunch. Supposedly they're from Zeta Reticuli. And that in 53 we allowed them to have certain underground bases in which they could do certain types of genetic experimentation and energy experimentation in league with the U.S. military, and that in 1953 the Dulce Mesa was put together. There have been controversies as to the dating as to a lot of this. I will give you the legends. I don't have any proof for this, but I will give you the legends as to the base. That in 1979, a disagreement took place between the United States government and said aliens. The Dulce base reportedly was set up to be between 7 and 12 levels. That eyewitnesses have said or stated to us that the base was approximately about 450 feet down because they were taken inside elevators when the ships would land, when they would take the people that were being abducted in the back way. Usually the ships would come down the vents and come into a large hangar area, but a number of the abductees described being taken in a back way and down an elevator and then down some stairs. That this thing was supposedly 450 feet below ground, and approximately, you figure 7 to 12 levels of a level is approximately 20 feet high. It gives you an idea as to how high the base is, and that it seemed to extend out with a power source at the center. Now, very hard stuff to prove, because here we have you can climb all over the mountain. I mean, because all you have to do is get the permission of the Apaches, and you can climb up and down and right, left, and center, but it's wilderness area. It's sometimes difficult to get the permission of the Apaches because it's Apache hunting ground in essence, and they like to keep a lot of the deer and the livestock there for themselves. And then, of course, there's Bob Gomez, who's kind of crotchety, but also says that he wants to go up to one of these vents and drop a bomb on the boogies, quote unquote. When this disagreement occurred between the U.S. military, now this is the legend that I'm giving you now, that a disagreement occurred between the military and the aliens because the aliens had basically gotten farming rights to this planet in exchange for nothing more than a few Model Ts, in essence a couple of saucers that they gave us to take apart and figure out how they work and what have you. But they were also giving us, they apparently gave us the code to breaking the human genome, or the human RNA DNA structure, which then allowed us to be able to do all kinds of genetic engineering and crossbreeding human beings with animals and different types of animals, which was supposedly what was going on in concert with the Los Alamos Atomic Energy and Genetics Research Lab in Los Alamos, New Mexico. That when the disagreement occurred, the military insisted on certain types of weapons. The aliens themselves then said, no, we're not going to give you weapons, we'll give you the ships, but we're not going to give you the weapons. The military supposedly at the same time broke into a number of different underground levels, which the aliens had kept secure into themselves and somewhat secret from their military partners. And then when they broke into these levels, they found that the levels were just strewn with bodies of either misbegotten genetic experiments or human beings that they didn't want to put back and had bled dry and thrown down into these underground levels. That these two disagreements happening simultaneously occurred. The U.S. military then said to the aliens, get out of our bases, get off our planet. The aliens supposedly then said, oh yeah, make us. We then sent in a Delta Force team to try to get them out. All of our military personnel, or certainly specifically all the scientific personnel, was not evacuated. 66 Delta Force members died. The scientists supposedly were then there at the not so tender mercies of the aliens, which I think think serves them damn right, actually. So they got a taste of their own medicine. And eventually the aliens supposedly took over the base. Now, coming up to 1989. In the late 1980s, a fellow by the name of Bill Moore, who is famous for the MJ-12 papers and has worked with Stanton Friedman and now runs a magazine called Far Out Magazine with a guy named Michael DiGregorio. Bill Moore claimed that he made up the Dulce Mesa. His story, in essence, was, I made up the Dulce Mesa just to show you how stupid most UFO investigators can be. And his story was, in fact, that the whole thing was a disinformation operation. Bill Moore, in essence, then admitted that he was a disinformation agent, claiming that he had made up the story just to see how far it would run in the UFO community, how far people would take it, how dumb we could be in believing whatever the story was, and that the Dulce Mesa was basically just a fairy tale that Bill Moore had made up in the back of his own rather warped mind. Well, this kind of hurt our feelings because we had, because of all the investigations that we had done and all the people that we had talked to and the numbers of Indians who were claiming that there were things going on, where were the cattle mutilations coming from, where were the abductions coming from? This wasn't just something that was happening in a vacuum. Bill Moore sort of made it his life's work to also destroy poor Paul Bennewitz's life. Benowitz now is, when I interviewed him as far back as 89, Benowitz was a man who was very palsied, very physically ill. Some people say he's been taken away or put in a sanitarium or something, but as far as I know, he still lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's somewhat of a recluse. He was very frightened by his experiences, supposedly because these aliens were coming over his computer. He claims to have been perpetually attacked, not only by the government, but by the aliens. He has a very unusual square scar on his right wrist, where he claims that an alien supposedly came in, stood at the foot of his bed, and tried to attach this device to his hand, where he jumped up and grabbed a bat and took a swipe at this thing, and I guess it bounced off some sort of energy field or what have you. Benowitz claims also his prophecy from this, and this is kind of an interesting bit of kind of National Enquirer type information, that he says that March 12th, 1993 was going to be what he called the Night of Lights and the Day of Discs, and that there were a group of rather large blonde aliens that he called the Urantians, and that they were approximately a light year from Earth, and that they were amassing, and that they were either going to invade or at least show up supposedly on that date. This is Benowitz's date. I've heard some corroboration of that date from other witnesses, but I'm not sure if they got it from Benowitz or not. March 12th, 1993. Now, let me tell you, as far as what we did as far as Dulce goes. Now, we wanted to come up with abject physical proof that an alien base actually existed. Well, how exactly do you do that? You can't prove it to the skeptics with eyewitness reports. You can't seem to prove it with cattle mutilations. You can't prove it with people who claim that they see things coming and going. You have to come up with some sort of hard scientific evidence. So, Jim 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪, who was a brilliant fellow, he might be here at the conference. Jim was one of the 5 individuals who was one of the inventors of the Cray supercomputer. Jim also invented virtual memory for computers, and he also, have you seen the commercials now for the AT&T video phone that actually sends video signals over telephone wires? Jim invented that. So Jim having access to a Cray supercomputer through the University of Arizona, and Jim saying, we just want to prove that Bill Moore is a liar, that he just lies like a dog in the sun, we figured out a way to actually ultrasound the Dulce Mesa. What we did is we took certain types of equipment up to the what's also called the Dulce Archuleta Mesa. We took things up to the Mesa to see if we could find specifically a power source. In essence, why we needed to prove that there was a power source is that if we simply proved that there was something under there, people would say, well, it's just a cave. So what? Big deal, you found a cave. What we had to prove was that there was not only a cave and a structure and a cavern there that had an organized structure to it, but that in fact it was emitting some type of energy. Because if it wasn't emitting some type of energy, there would be no point to the investigation whatsoever. So myself, Jim 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪 Dr. Fred Bell all went to the Dulce Archuleta Mesa to ultrasound this. Once again, this was Jim Delatos's brainchild. I was just honored to be along with this, and Jim has given me the rights to show you the video today. We used a very interesting sound. The sound that we used for the ultrasound test was the sound from the Billy Meyer beam ships. A lot of you who have heard that sort of unusual thwopping sound, it has some very unusual sonic properties to it. It's 32 bands, approximately of which I think 8 of the bands are hypersonic and 6 of them are subsonic, so it carries a long way. It's got an unusual pulse of 278 RPMs per minute that runs through the sound. We used it for a number of reasons. First off, 𝗩𝗓𝗪𝗪𝗧 had done the original sonic analysis on the tones in the late 1970s on the sound from the Billy Meier beam ship, coming to the conclusion that Meier, in order to fake this sound, would have had to have had a 32-track studio and $250,000 to come up with this sound, none of which Billy Meier had. The second reason we use the sound is it had very piercing sonic properties. Let me, if I can just give you a brief science lesson here. Let's say, for example, that I placed this object inside an enclosed box, and that in essence, what I was trying to do is by sending a sound into the enclosed box, if I don't know what's in there, it works kind of the opposite of radar. And instead of a bounce back, we can tell from outside using a computer, because we know there are certain formulas as to what rate sound travels through certain types of materials at. I'm not going to bore you with this whole thing, but in essence, I would be able to tell you by pulsing a sound through this, by what came back, that this was plastic and that it was filled with a certain type of water, and you could tell basically the properties of it. Now, what we were looking for was we were looking for electrical outputs, and we wanted to see how our sound or our sonic would interact with any sort of electrical outputs that were coming from inside the Mesa. So we used the sound, one, because it had a particularly piercing quality to it and had some very unusual sonic properties. Two, because 𝗩𝗓𝗪𝗪𝗧 was familiar with the sound already, so he didn't have to go through all the work of already figuring out what sorts of tones were in the sound. Number three, and this was not part of the scientific part, but something that we did consider. We considered the fact that the grays, if there were in fact grays inside this mountain, were, I guess, what you would call inferior biological entities. They are inferior biological entities because of the fact that they run on a 3-chakra energy system spiritually. They are in fact a hive mind. They have no capacity for independent thought like we do. They are basically very intelligent animals. They're sort of like soulless automatons. And we felt that by using the Pleiadian sonic, that we would be able to pretty much either kill or pretty much piss off whatever was inside the mountain. By pounding this sound or the sonic into there, we'd give these guys a hell of a headache. Very much like you would take one of these things called an electrocat and plug it into your wall, and it sends an irritating frequency through the wires in your house. So we thought we might be able to get a reaction, that we would either kill these things dead or conceivably evacuate them entirely from the mountain once and for all, or they'd come up and kill us. So we weren't exactly sure what was going to happen. So what we did, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you, if you want to hit the lights, I'll explain it as we go along, and I'll show you exactly what it is we found. This is Dr. 𝗩𝗓𝗪𝗧 at his house. I'm conducting the interview. This once again, when we took all of the sonics, and he's going to show you right here, you'll see the large green spot at the lower center of the screen is the actual town of Dulce. About 3,000 people live in it. The Apache Indian headquarters is run out of the Best Western Hotel there. We got permission from them to run around the mountain and pretty much do whatever we damn well pleased. These blocks that you're about to see are the actual Mesa itself is to the right there, but the actual blocks that you're about to see are the various areas where we placed transceivers that were hooked up into 9-volt batteries that we buried into the ground that were pulsing this Pleiadian Billy Meier beam ship sound, this sonic tone. Also, Dr. 𝗩𝗓𝗪𝗧 found a way to run the sound through a synthesizer so that the sound of the Billy Meier beam ships actually became a musical instrument of sorts, so that by running a number of tones up and down and then recording them on DAT tape, we then took the DAT tape, ran the DAT tape through. The result of what you're watching here now is the result of nearly 75 hours of Cray supercomputer time, which, if Jim was not one of the main inventors of the computer, if we didn't have access to it through the University of Arizona, this ultrasound would have probably run us close to $50 million. So, right here, what you're seeing are all the various transceivers. You can turn the sound down there. All the various transceivers as we buried them on the mountain. Another interesting thing too is the Dulce Archuleta Mesa is actually you'll see it right there, the mountain. I'm sorry, to the right in there, and we're going to show you from the top here. He's going to show you in a second the area that we ultrasounded through rings and what the interactive space was. Actually, if you can just you can fast forward through this part, because he's just explaining the various places where we put it. Another interesting thing about the Dulce Mesa as well is that it sits on a river which goes into the Dulce Lake. Right here, he's showing the exact area of frequency as to how far out the ultrasounds went, and the area that we were ultrasounding between these two peaks here. And here, okay, you can slow it down now. Right here, you can see the area of dispersion of what we were zeroing in on. Now, after the second ultrasounding, whoever was in the mountain, if there was anybody in the mountain, would know exactly what it was we were doing. And another thing that we hoped is that unless we gave these guys a headache, who knows, since the Greys and the Pleiadians are supposed to be genetic enemies, there may have been the possibility that they may have thought that they might have been under attack by 𝗪𝗪𝗧 and 𝗪𝗪𝗧 and whomever. So this area right in through here is the area that you can see that was ultrasounded through the test. I should fast forward it again so we get the actual sonic. Now remember, one of the things that we were searching for is we were searching for a source of electric or electromagnetic energy and a penumbra to that electromagnetic energy as well. Okay, slow it down. The mesa itself has a river which comes in cold on one side and comes out hot on the other side. A lot of the contactees and abductees well, the abductees specifically had stated that they had witnessed a central power source inside the mesa itself. Now, one of the things that we were looking for was this central power source. And as you can see, this block here is approximately 10 square miles, and it's been tilted up so that you can see a cross-section. The vertical lines that you see on the side are the rock faces, but you see that big red glow right in the center? That, folks, is an atomic reactor right in the middle. This atomic reactor is approximately, once again, 450 feet down. The structure itself is about 250 feet high. The green penumbra that you're seeing that runs from either side, specifically to the left, where he was just, well, not this section here, but just a little bit to the left and down, is a phase change, or where the actual electromagnetic frequencies were interacting with the sound or the sonic, which could have shown literally a tunnel or some sort of causeway or railroad system that runs lower to the left. The green flat areas that you were seeing would be indicative of levels or electricity that was being wired throughout a number of levels. And this green area here is the penumbra, or the wash-off, if you will, of the central power source. Now you can see the central power source glows up right in the center of the mesa. One of the things that we found was that whatever this thing was operating on between 400 and 480 cycles. Now, that's military standard. 440 is a military standard worldwide. So we discovered, in essence, an atomic pile underneath the Dulce Archuleta Mesa that was military standard, that seemed to have levels, that seemed to have a causeway or a railroad system running through the base, exactly like everybody said. Now, of course, Bill Moore will say that I'm lying, or that we made this up, or that we somehow came up with some schmancy computer graphic, but right here we finally put the lie to him to show that he probably was a disinformation from the start, and the government found that this base was probably so valuable they were willing to actually explode one of their better agents in order to keep this facility secret. We were there on December 17th, 18th, and 19th of 1989, over 3 days. It was about 2 degrees above zero when we were on the mesa itself. And when we were on the mesa itself. Now, something very interesting happened. We left all those transceivers buried in the ground. On December 27th of that same year, my roommate came in from a fellow by the name of Pat Miner, came in from a scuba expedition from the Catalina Islands, all excited. And he came in saying, "My God, you should have seen this thing. It was a giant green fireball, and it flashed over the Catalina Islands, and then this thing went out about 100 or so miles. This big ball just got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then hooked a hard angle turn and went south." So we thought this was very unusual, and we called up some of the local police stations and weather stations and asked what it was. And there was a piece that appeared in the next day on the December 28th issue of the Los Angeles Times, on the back page of the View section, that said, "Huge green fireball flashes across 4 states." This green fireball apparently had first been spotted, according to the initial reports, between the Lumberton, Farmington, Durango area. That it had been spotted traveling between 13 and 30,000 feet at an approximate speed of about 15,000 miles per hour. and that this thing went over the Catalina Islands, hooked a left, and then was not seen. When we called John Moseley at the Griffith Observatory, John Moseley stated, we don't know what it was, we think it was a meteor. And we said, well, how does a meteor just appear on a radar screen, travel in a straight line between 13 and 30,000 feet? He said, I don't know. Then we said, how do you explain the hard angle right turn? He said, well, maybe it fragmented. So, I don't, you know, Jim has to, I don't know if he has to protect his job with these irrational explanations. But first thing we did was we thought, hey, wait a minute, the Dulce Mesa is right in the center of this. So we called our guide at the Dulce Mesa, a very funny Indian fellow named Fred Electric Warrior is the fellow's name, and he claimed that yes, that they had seen this huge green fireball actually rising up out of the Dulce Mesa on the evening of the 27th of December. That apparently a week or so later, actually about 2 weeks later, it was on the 6th of January, another huge green fireball was seen rising up out of the mesa and heading east this time. Now from that time to this, as far as I know, since we were there in December of '89, there's not been a single sighting at the Dulce Mesa. And this was one of the hot spots in the world for sightings, for cattle mutilations, for abductions, et cetera, that there has not been a single sighting, a single cattle mutilation, zippo, nothing, since December of 1989. So what happened? Did we drive them out? Did we figure out a way, did we discover where their hideout was? Did we figure out a way to give them enough of a headache to get them out of the Dulce Mesa? I don't know. John Lear tells me that according to his information that the base conceivably was reactivated about 6 months ago. Once again, I've talked to the Indians there. They haven't noticed any real activity. So hopefully we did something good. Anyway, that's the Dulce Mesa. Okay, let's get into a little field investigation here, and I'm going to explain a little bit about a field investigation that we're doing up in Northern California. Sort of been caught without any of my maps, but I'll just have to explain to you where something is. Tuesday night we had something very interesting happen. A friend of mine, a guy by the name of John Hadley, that I just basically ran into from going out to Area 51 so much. John has had a large number of sightings in the Immigrant Gap area, which is up in Northern California near Lake Tahoe. It's outside of a town called Nyack, which is in between Auburn and Truckee. This area is, it's right near the Donner Lake area, and it's comprised of dozens of various very small lakes that are in these very inaccessible canyons. And John had said that he had seen a great deal of activity around specifically the Mount English Bowman Lake area. So since I was on vacation and doing what UFO investigators do when they're on vacation, we went out and froze our butts off out there and went out in the snow and had our camera set up, and we had our binoculars and the whole thing, and basically sat in the car and listened to a couple of Peter Gabriel tapes as we're waiting for something to happen. And something did. This was Tuesday night. Tuesday during the day, let me preface this with another kind of interesting thing that we did on Mount English itself. John had a source named Alan. And Alan claimed to have had some sort of contact with the aliens. Now, I'm not a person who is blessed with contacts from extraterrestrials. I don't channel. I used to channel, but all I ever got was ESPN, and then I just started spouting out USC football game scores. And tough crowd, I tell you, tough crowd. I look stupid carrying that little box around in my head, so anyway, I don't channel anymore. So it's left to myself and actual investigators to actually go out there and, do the work to find information out instead of having Zorton tell us what's going on from out in the universe. So what we did is that we had spoken to this fellow Alan. This fellow Alan gave us the location of a cave, and he claimed that this cave was in fact an entrance to this alien base underneath Mount English. Being rather suspicious of this, that this might have been the fact that we might just go trucking down the cave and that maybe this guy was acting like a front man to get people abducted, we went down there during the day. We took a device that I believe is called a magnetometer that John had, and we hooked it up to some of the rocks along with some stethoscopes. Now we went down a couple hundred yards or so into this cave, we put the stethoscopes up against the ground and up against the wall, and we heard a thrumming sound, kind of a, there was some sort of machinery that was going on underground. Now most of this mountain is primarily made out of granite, which is very good for tunneling in and very good for making caves and bases and what have you, but there was a thrumming machine sound that was coming from it. When we hooked the magnetometer up to some rocks and the ground and the rocks there, we were getting a positive negative electromagnetic reading, which was showing that there was something going on. There was some sort of machinery going on there. Now, we decided to go back into the cave at some later point when we had a bunch of people and were heavily armed with Uzis and 38s and 44s to go down to the end of the cave where this fellow told us the supposed holographic entrance to this was. Whether or not the guy was nuts, I don't know, but I didn't want to find out particularly. So we got out of the cave after hearing the thrumming sound, and we decided we would go to a place at the end of Bowman Lake, which was going to be where we might be able to see things happening. At approximately 9:45, we saw a large red object come up out of the, we were on this side of Mount English, and so the bases itself, supposedly the entrances were on the other side, but they're almost inaccessible without a four-wheel drive, which we didn't have. We saw, at 45-minute intervals, 3 red lights that came up out of the mountain, hovered for about a minute or so, and then just shot off in different directions on 3 occasions. 9:45, 10:30, and 11:15 was when that happened. We also had a very unusual thing happen where there was a thrumming or a humming sound, and down below us there was a black object which we were desperately trying to take photographs of. It was the only way I can describe it is we were up on a hill and we were looking down on it, and we were probably within a quarter to half a mile of this object, but it was a large, it looked like a bat plane, kind of. It was a large delta wing boomerang that was black that you could barely see. I mean, the only way we could see it was the moonlight. It was blotting out the moonlight in the trees, and this thing hummed up the valley, moving between about 15 and 25 miles an hour, stopped a little bit south of our position, then just made a very slow turn and went back down the valley again. Now, the wingspan on this thing was probably, I'd say a little under 100 feet or so it was pretty big. And it went back down the valley. And we had no idea what the heck this thing was, but hopefully we're going to go back to the Mount English area to go find out. Now, how field investigation is done is just through stuff like this. It's through guys who are willing to go out and freeze and talk to people and get the stories. And part of UFO investigation has to do with the fact that you've got to be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, an investigative journalist. You've got to be sort of part magician, part con man, part babysitter. You have to have all these various disciplines put together in order to take something as fantastic as what it is we're talking about and present it to the skeptical community. Just my experience with Unsolved Mysteries has been the fact that since Unsolved Mysteries does its homework, we have to get 5 witnesses to any event. We usually do recreations. You have to do all of your homework before you pitch something to the producer. Just to give you an example, one of the cases that you're going to be seeing on Unsolved Mysteries will be the case of Alice Haggerty in New York. Alice Haggerty is a fabulous case because here's a woman who is a UFO abductee. Now, when you say UFO abductee, you probably just think of somebody who had a hypnotic regression, who had some wild thing happen where they were taken up and put on a table and yada yada. Bud Hopkins has thousands of stories. David Jacobs, who wrote his book Secret Life, has thousands of stories. But when we at Unsolved Mysteries said, well, where's the hard evidence? Where's the proof? Can you show us somebody with a probe? They threw up their hands and said, no, we can't. So you can see when we're trying to pitch this story to John Q. Public out there on a top 10 program that's seen by 40 million people, you got to have some proof. You got to have some hard evidence. You can't have Bob Stack up there simply saying, one night Fluffy wandered out the dog door into the rain and no one's seen Fluffy again. Was Fluffy abducted by aliens? That's just a tale. It's a wild tale. But what we have with Alice Haggerty is that Alice Haggerty is not only a fabulous case because her abduction started when she was 5, when she had diphtheria, was taken on board a ship, placed in a large glass tube, irradiated with a blue beam, the diphtheria vanished, and then 2 years later she was then abducted again with probes placed up behind the nasal cavity. Now, we've heard this story a lot of times, but in this case, we did x-rays, we did MRIs on this woman, and not only did we do that, but the probes, which were ball-shaped, which had an antenna that sort of came out the end. These 2 probes, which were placed up in her nose, when she opens her mouth, we put the camera up in her mouth, and you can see the spikes coming out from the roof of her mouth of the probe. Pretty convincing, don't you think? When this woman opens her mouth, and you can see just at the back of the palate of the top of the mouth, these 2 spikes. Where do they come from? How did they get there? We've got the head of UCLA radiology. We've showed him these things. He said, well, it could be a bone fragment. And then we said, well, look at this. What do you think this is? And we showed him the photograph of the spikes. And he goes, I don't know. So we have the head of UCLA radiology saying, I don't know. Then we said, well, how could you put them in there? He said, I don't know. Then he said, well, how would you get them out? And he said, well, I suppose you could cut her head open with a laser. So that's a story. I mean, that gives you the hard physical evidence that you need to convince people out there who are not believers like we are. So, getting back to the field investigation, last night we went out to Area 51. A group of us went out to Area 51, saw some very unusual things. John Lear had given me some information, since John lives here and he's much closer to it than I am, living in Hermosa Beach in Los Angeles. John had stated that there was a great deal of activity that was going on near a place called Warm Springs. Now, the way Area 51 is situated, and I had a big map here that, once again, I didn't bring in. But Area 51 is 135 miles north of Las Vegas, up 95. Now, it's kind of interesting because 95 and 93, is that a road map, Randy? Is that what that is? Well, that's okay. Everybody pretty much knows where it is. I'll just have to describe that 95 and 93 go around the Nellis gunnery range, and that 93 comes up this way, and I believe it's 375 that comes up the other direction, up around the top, where 375 and 95 conjunct is a little town called Warm Springs. It's not even a town, it's just a building, actually. In this area, about 5 or so miles off the road, John said that there were a number of abductions and there was a great deal of activity. So, as I was coming back from Lake Tahoe to visit my folks for Thanksgiving, I was driving along Warm Springs, that Warm Springs Road right there, and at approximately 6:02 p.m., I saw some very unusual military activity. Now, this is nothing that can be explained as I didn't see a saucer, I didn't see I didn't see a wing configuration on it, but what it was it looked as though to be a triangle of helicopters, and in the center of this there was a very fast-moving red strobing light. And what this was doing, and it wasn't doing right-angle turns, it was doing a number of sweeps and what have you, but as it would sweep, it would lay out a pattern of 4 or 5 fireballs behind it. Now, being out at Area 51 as much as I have, usually when they send up military flares, you'll see the orange fireballs and they'll burn for a very long time, probably being magnesium, and float down. These were laid out in a pattern that went boom, 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 and then they would all stay lit, and then one by one they would, after only about, how long would you say, about, you've seen them, I guess, about 10, 15 seconds or so, they would just go ping, 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 and they would just all blink out. Now, we also saw a number of these things, these double action fireballs. At first I thought what it might have been a fleet of jets or a close formation of jets kicking in their afterburners, but then again there was no sound. We would have heard them go as this occurred. I sat and watched the activity for about 15 minutes or so, and then it seemed to move south of my position. Now at about 6:30, Michael Hesseman was down there at the mailbox on Mailbox Road, where they saw pretty much the same thing about 6:30. When we're all at the Alien chatting about this, that, and the other thing, I walked outside of the car to get a T-shirt, and it occurred again directly east of Rachel. Same thing, triangle with a number of these flashes. Now, nothing like in the old days, it seems, that when we used to actually physically see the ships. Let me give you my first experience out at Area 51 and why I became interested in it to begin with. First off, some people have said that Bob Lazar's story is untrue. Specifically, Bill Cooper has said that Bob Lazar's story is untrue. Even if Bob Lazar's story is completely fabricated, Bob Lazar, in essence, told us, look, you don't have to believe a thing I say. You go out to this road, you stand at this mailbox at this time, and you'll see things happen. And we did, and they did, and I believe Bob Lazar because the stuff out there actually occurs. When we were out there on the 26th of February of 1991, I was out there with a friend of mine named Jeff Slack, who had already been there 5 times. I was there with an LA Times reporter and an LA Times photographer as well. It was pouring rain, it was freezing cold, and we got lost, I guess, on the Groom Road. The sheriff had just told us to turn around, that we were going to stumble into the gunnery range and get blown up by something, so we had turned around. The reporter and the photographer were in the car in front of us with all of our photographic equipment. We were in the car behind them. What occurred was there was a weird sound, kind of like a wow sound, just like that, and a flash of light over the car. Well, I'm looking around, and I stopped the car, and off to our left in the desert is this sort of bouncing ball of light. Well, I stopped the car, we got out of the car, and we're screaming, we're throwing rocks at the car in front of us, trying to get them to stop, because they've got all their stuff in the front of the car, and they just kept driving along, not being able to hear us. So we're jumping up and down, going crazy, and I said, look, I'm not going to mess this up, let's chase this thing. So what I did is I reach in and I get my hat. I have this sort of leather wool hat that's a Minnesota Vikings hat that's got these horns that come out of it. So I put this thing on, I grab my flashlight with my buddy, I go running pell-mell, hell-bent for leather, willy-nilly out into the desert after this thing. My friend Jeff is screaming at me going, stop, you look like a cow, you're going to get your anus cord out or something, and I'm just trucking after this thing with my little flashlight. Jeff is real out of shape, so Jeff is huffing and puffing. I mean, it's about 5,000 feet up. And we get to within about, I'd say, between 250, it varied, between about 250 and 500 yards of this object floating about 50 feet off the ground in the middle of the valley. Now, I'm going crazy. I'm jumping up and down because I've never seen a UFO before in my life. And now here's one, like, served up on a platter right in front of me doing this. Just shoot up to about 200 feet in the air and then shoot back down and then just do this sort of weird motion, and then it would get real low to the ground and make kind of a hissing sound as it got close to the ground. I guess because the ground was wet, but other than that, it didn't make any noise. So the thing's just bouncing around. I'm jumping up and down. I'm punching my friend in the arm. I'm going crazy, and he's blasé about it. He says, well, I've been out here 5 times before, and I see this stuff all the time, so for me, it's no big deal. And and I'm like, what? No big deal. Oh, I'm losing my voice. Oh, this is great. Oh, look at this. So finally, as the thing began to sort of move off down the desert, we ran back to the car, did like 3 or 4 miles down the road where everybody was gathered. This was the first time that my friend Gary Schultz had also been out there as well. They're all sitting in a car, and they were sitting in Anthony Hilder's, he has this old Kennedy-style Lincoln Continental with these little tiny windows that were all fogged up, and they're looking the wrong way. They're looking at the lights of Las Vegas thinking it's the base because it's the first time they've been out there. So they're all sitting here going, gee, I wish something would happen. I wish something would happen. We come up, hey, you seen all this stuff going on behind you here? And it's like the aliens were doing this, like behind them, while these guys were looking down. And they said, no, the base is over there. I said, no, it's up there. And look at that. It's down the valley. So we grabbed the photographer out of the car. The LA Times photographer. We sit the guy and we say, look, there it is. And this little ball, by this time it was miles down the valley, but you can still see this thing doing these little figure eights and these little maneuvers and gracefully moving down the valley. So the photographer says, when and we're twisting this guy's arm, pounding on him, saying, take a picture of this damn thing. He said, well, all I brought was my portrait camera. I said, what? He said, well, I didn't come to take pictures of UFOs. I came to take pictures of people looking for UFOs. And it's raining, and I'm going to go back to Vegas because I don't want to get my camera wet. So he jumps in his car, and he goes back to Vegas. At about 9:45, the sky just lights up with these things. I mean, this was back in the old days when this stuff used to happen all the time. And we're standing about halfway up Groom Road where we've got one in front of us, one behind us, 2 on either side of us, like things streaking across the sky. I mean, it was literally like being in the last scene of Close Encounters, where all this stuff was just moving all around. And by the end of the night, I'd never seen a UFO before, and I was like bored with them by the end of the night because it's like, oh, well, okay, let's see something new. Let's see a big one come down. So that was my first experience with this. And over the last couple of years, we've laid out a table of times that we thought were particularly good for testing. For example, Wednesday nights seem to be best. The reason Wednesday nights, and here's some weird things about Wednesday nights. We took all of the UFO sightings that have been made everywhere in the world since the modern UFO era began with the Battle of Los Angeles in February 26th of 1942, when this UFO just parked itself over Culver City for about 6 hours. That's going to be an Unsolved Mysteries episode too. Shh. One of the witnesses in that is Leonard DeForest Kelly. I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer, Jim. So you guys will get to see Bones talking about how they fought this UFO over Culver City, and so it's a very interesting story. But anyway, we took all of this data, we ran it into a computer, and we found that on an upright spike, sightings across the world in the northern hemisphere go up nearly 80% between January 15th and April 30th, Wednesday nights between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m. And this seems to be a constant. Now in the southern hemisphere it's reversed because there it's their springtime when they have the sightings, but once again it is still on a Wednesday night. Wednesday night was called Whedon's Day or Odin's Day because Odin, it was believed, was out in his chariot flying around. There are Irish and Hebrew legends that you were not to leave the house on Wednesday night because of the fact that it was believed that either the leprechauns or the daemons would kidnap you and do something to you or kidnap your children and what have you. So Wednesday night has always been, there's always been something about it. My dad, who used to fly the SR-71 Blackbird up at this base in the late 50s, said, well, the reason they would fly probably on Wednesday nights would be, he used to live in Reno. So they used to fly him on Monday. They'd fly him from Reno down into the base. This was back when they're, I mean, they were still doing top secret stuff, but no saucer stuff or aliens or anything spooky. But Monday they would fly them in, and they would usually get briefed on what the mission specs were going to be for the rest of the week. Tuesday they would get together and they would work on the equipment, and a lot of times they would let the pilots look over the shoulders of the engineers just so they knew what the capabilities of the aircraft were, because these were the guys who were going to put their butts in the seats and fly them, basically risk their lives flying these designs. Wednesday they would fly the mission primarily because everybody was primed, everybody was ready, it was the middle of the week. Thursday they would debrief, and then Friday they'd either throw a barbecue or all go out and get drunk or whatever. On Friday it was sort of party, or people would just fly home for the weekend. So over the years, since 91 or so, we've come up with a pattern. They seem, not only Wednesday nights, the big season is coming up, they don't seem to test much in the summer. However, this summer, there was a great deal of activity in June and July, and also I was out there in August where we saw one rather large object, which I thought, and a lot of these objects we find out later are then preceded by these skyquakes that come in over Southern California. Anybody from you all familiar with the skyquakes? I don't know if they report them outside of Los Angeles, but the skyquakes are, there is an object apparently traveling between like Mach 8 and Mach 15 that seems to come in from space right over Catalina Island, right over my house on the beach, because the windows will start to shake. And a skyquake is different from an earthquake. In an earthquake, the ground starts shaking, then the doors will start shaking, then the windows will go. When the vibration is coming from the top, the windows start going first, and then the doors, and then the ground. And these were creating 3.4 seismic disturbances on the Richter scale as whatever this thing was coming in from space over Catalina Island, missing Edwards and landing smack dab at Groom Lake. And this has been on every news channel in Los Angeles. 3 corridors. They apparently use Los Angeles because of the lights to land at Groom Lake. They apparently use San Diego also because of the lights, and they come in another corridor over above Mount Shasta because of the glaciers. And the glaciers show up like big red dots on infrared, in essence, because of the cold. There are 3 projects that I think that they have going on out there, one of which I've seen. Supposedly Project Senior Prom, Project Senior Citizen, and Project Senior Crown. Project Senior Citizen, which is, I think, the one I'm going to show you here, I believe, was Project Senior Prom, what I'm going to show you landing here. Project Senior Prom is supposedly a part of the Aurora project. The only way we know about, a lot of people have heard about Aurora and they're testing the Aurora. The only way we found out about the Aurora project was that the military put a new SR project. It's called Senior this or Senior that because it stands for Surveillance and Reconnaissance. They put a Surveillance and Reconnaissance project in a white category, which means that the Congress could find out about it instead of part of a black budget. So when people started saying, what is this? Why are you spending billions of dollars for this and that? The military said, well, a big mistake doesn't exist. The one object that they have is shaped very much like a large surfboard. It's rounded at the nose and comes off. I wish I had something I could draw on here, but basically it's rounded at the nose and it's still sort of flat, so it looks very much like a surfboard, and then tapers off at the end to a point. Now what this thing has is it has a number of chutes at the top of it, which are all designed for nuclear missiles, 132 MIRVs, which are multiple reentry vehicles, basically. And these MIRVs can then, in essence, from space, blow any country in the world to smithereens within seconds. It is supposedly an unmanned vehicle because they wanted to take the pilots out of the loop for fear of the fact that any sort of pilot, when given the order to press a button and kill 1 billion people in China, would have a lapse of conscience. So it's much easier for little scientists playing Nintendo down on the ground to press a button than it is for a scientist who's a fighter pilot who's actually going to do the deed. It's called Senior Prom because it's for the big party, quote unquote. The Project Senior Citizen is, and this is what I believe we saw, this was August, I think it was August 17th of this last year, at 10:45 p.m. We were up on top of the mountain looking down on the base, and we had just started coming down off the mountain, and we were sort of halfway on the mountain when we saw these 2 very large lights. Now this is what was unusual about it, is that the object itself looked like 2 doorstops that were put together because it had a flat, blunt nose on the front of it, and then it had 2, like a point in the middle, and then tapered down, but tapered down to a cut-off end, and the end was kind of a large, not really a circle, but sort of a large distended rectangle, and there was unusual lights, like multicolored lights, looking as though it powered this thing, and all we could really see was this light with what looked like a light on the nose and a light on the bottom portion of this. Now when we were looking at it through the binoculars, it was very difficult to see. We could see a white stripe along the top, or a white section along the top, and the bottom part was almost invisible. And we took videotape of it, and unfortunately all that came out were just these 2 red lights that you could see, which from a distance would look like, say, helicopters and any other planes flying in formation. But when we looked at it in our night scope, one of the fellows had one of these infrared night scopes, you could see the black bottom of this thing and the fact that it was blunted at the nose, and this thing was probably gearing it was traveling about 50 miles an hour, very slow, like a blimp. And it made one loop underneath Mount Irish, around Hancock Summit, came down around the other end of the valley, and then came down near the Papoose end of the lake, or near the jumbled hills, and then came down into the base itself. And this object was probably about 700 feet long. It's huge. It was like an aircraft carrier. Now, I have been told, supposedly, and we're in the process of trying to get some proof on this, that this object is in fact a shuttle that takes supplies and personnel back and forth to our 4 bases on the moon. That we have 4 bases on the moon, and this is one thing I could tell you. You saw the Dulce Mesa footage. I don't make a statement of fact unless I know something is absolutely positively for real. I've got 2 godfathers who are astronauts. I've got a guy, my dad used to run NASA and TRW, and we got bases on the moon, folks. I mean, flat out. I don't know about Mars, but we got bases on the moon. We got 4 of them. We got one in the Tzaroslavsky crater, which is on the backside of the crater, backside of the moon, one in the Van de Graaff crater, which is also on the backside, and one in the King crater, and one in the Tycho Brahe crater on the front side of the moon, which are sort of near the edge. And one of the reasons the Apollo program was closed down, I felt, when I talked to Dave Scott about this, and Dave had a couple of drinks, and Dave was the fellow who drove the lunar rover on the moon. I said, why didn't you go back? Why was Apollo 18 paid for, sitting on the pad, astronauts in training, why was it canceled? And Dave said, kind of under his breath, well, because they didn't want us there. And I said, who's they? The government didn't want to pay for it? And he said, no, whoever's up there didn't want us there, unquote. And then I said, I tried to question him some more, and he said, oh, did I say that? No, no, and he wandered off, and I'd never actually been able to talk to him about it again. But in 1969, Apollo 11 was sending back photos on the moon of exactly what our space shuttle looks like today, except with a pointed nose on it, parked in the Van de Graaff crater, which are photos I've seen and photos I have, and big ships with noses on them, and you can see the windows, and you can see the cockpit, and you can see these delta wings on the back of them, and they're sitting in the Van de Graaff crater. There's 2 more. They're sitting in another crater that are parked. They look like rabbit ears sticking up out of the top of the crater. And most of this is NASA public information. And that's one of the reasons why the military wants to keep such a tight rein on NASA, because everything that you've seen NASA do, flights to the moon, space shuttles, satellites, et cetera, is done with about 1.5% to 2% of the federal budget. Imagine, if you will, 50% of the federal budget, which is devoted to military spending, and of that maybe half of it going to black projects, all the drug money that the CIA pulls in from heroin smuggling and our good friend George Bush and the cocaine smuggling, what have you, all of this international drug money from all around the world in order to fund these various projects. Imagine what they can do with unlimited funds and unlimited resources, and the fact that the military is always between 6 and 15 years ahead of anything that you know, using the barometer of Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier and it taking them about 6 years to admit that Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. So if you figure if they're just that much more ahead of us, I suggest that you talk to individuals like Al Bielek, or buy the book The Montauk Project as an example to show you where the government really is in the source of this. There are cells within the government where no information has been lost ever. That these scientists work with unlimited resources, with unlimited time, unlimited facilities at their disposal. And they're told to do whatever they want. If they want to work on time fields or space fields or warp drive or whatever, there's no politics. It's basically science for science's sake. Let me show you some of the stuff at Area 51 here. Okay, these are just people who've just basically just slept out in the dirt all night just to watch things go on, as usually happens out there. What you'll see here is you'll just see, you can just keep fast forwarding it, but what you'll see is you'll see a couple of white trucks, which are workmen coming to the base. We wave at them, try to be real friendly, and the guys in the bus flip us the bird from out of the bus. We wave at these guys, and they hang out the window and flip us off. Here's the bus. You can slow it down. You can see, this is the bus that brings people into Area 51. You can see the windows aren't blacked out. There's nothing real secretive about it. It's just a big blue bus. It picks everybody up at Crystal Springs. This here, what you're about to see, was taken under great duress and at great risk to our own personal safety, but this is the first videotape of Area 51 ever taken. That light that you're seeing there is the halogen lamp which lights up the guard shack, and right there is the base. This is on top of what we affectionately call Morton's Mountain, because I was the first person to find the peak and actually do this videotape. We did not know at this time whether or not we were over the military's border, and they made it very clear that they didn't want us there. They had gone through the car at the base of the hill. They had followed us up half of the way with Humvees. What you're seeing there is you're seeing a long runway, which is about between 3 and 6 miles long. Those lights to the left are a massive hangar, and there are 9 huge field lights that light up the field. This is almost like a city, because it extends for probably another mile or so up the other end of the valley with a large number of offices, and most of this facility here is new. These hangars are supposedly some of the biggest in the world. I think they're 250, 300 feet high, these hangars. As big, if not bigger, as the hangars at Moffett Field in Northern California. Now, why these lights have gone on is that whenever a plane lands, the hangar lights will go on in order to, you can see actually the object to the left, which is a plane. It's actually moving across the screen. That's a 737. You can see how far down the runway actually extends coming into the base. Now there's a road that leads in the back, and we saw cars moving along the road, and this road goes up and back in the mountains and goes another 15 miles down to the Papoose Lake facility, which is virtually impenetrable now because it's surrounded by about 10 to 15 miles of government land. This is the chink in their armor because it's a point where it's kind of an unusual bulge right exactly where the borderline of the base is. If you go another 2 miles up the road, you'll see the warning signs at the front. And just to show that the military wasn't as bad or as nasty or as smart as anybody thought, I ran up to the fence and stole the signs off the gate. I stole one, and then George Knapp got jealous and he stole the other one, and then Jacques Vallée wandered up there and went all the way up to the military guard shack, and they were saying, oh, didn't you see the signs? And they apparently took him out of his car and threw him on his face and cuffed him and did all kinds of nasty things to him. And Jacques Vallée, in his book Revelations, mentions us indirectly by calling us hooligans for stealing the signs. You can fast forward through this part if you want. This basically just shows you, in essence, the base. Now, when we spent the night up there, yes, ma'am?
Is that a halogen lamp glowing right there?
Those are 9 of them, actually, along a huge building. And you'll see a little bit later. Now, this is unusual. This is probably another lamp in the desert. What you can see is at the top is the backdrop of the mountain range, and we're looking over a section of mountain range there. That lamp, or that light in the center, is being attended to by a number of trucks and vehicles. The little lights that you see on either side of it are trucks that are coming and going from that light. Now, whether or not it was a road crew that was working on maybe extending the runway, which is possible, it's something that they've done, and supposedly in the last few months they've built another runway on the other side of the Groom Valley. At first we thought it was some kind of ship because it was just there and it was glowing in the night, and it looks exactly like you see it on the videotape with these objects going back and forth to it, but it didn't make any maneuvers and didn't make any wild changes, and we figured it probably was just some area where the military was either doing some kind of work or extending the runway. You can fast forward through this if you like. That just gives you an idea of what the base looks like at night. And the reason we took these at night was because, once again, this is the fact that we weren't really sure whether or not we were still on public land. We had been harassed and intimidated by the sheriffs. At that time, anybody that was out there at about 6 or 7 a.m., there was a helicopter that would come by and literally fly 10 to 15 feet above your head. This, the first time this occurred was, I think, in 2 months before this, March, April. In April of 91, which was when this was taken, Gary Schultz was out there with Norio Hayakawa, and they were up the road a little ways at a campsite that we'd made, and as they were coming down the road, a Sikorsky CH-38 helicopter came out of the base and attacked Gary's car, literally dented the roof of his car with its wheel. Now, a Sikorsky CH-38 is huge. It's one of those big, well, it's not a transport, but it's one of those big choppers that you saw in Vietnam, the transport choppers. And this thing came down and just went bam and banged into Gary's car. Now, what they did is that they filed federal charges against the government for assault with a deadly weapon, the deadly weapon being the helicopter. And since then, the military has sort of backed off. However, whenever we were camped out up there or on the hill, we had to get out of there by 6 o'clock because these choppers would come out of the base and take photographs of whomever was out there and fly within 10, 15 feet above your head. And it was a rather terrifying experience. You can turn the sound up here if you like. That light just stayed steady virtually the entire night. And as you can see, the date on there, June 27th, 1991. Now every morning at approximately 4:50 a.m. there's an object that lights up in the sky. Notice the section in the center here which is not lit. But there's an object which always appears which we call Old Faithful, because something always happens at 4:50 a.m. exactly.
Yeah? Do you see it? Right there. To the right. That's it. Okay, you guys can.
Now this light simply just appeared in the sky. It's not like you see it coming. It was fairly clear. Sometimes this light or this object will behave like a conventional UFO, doing right-angle turns and zipping back and forth. And 𝗪𝗘𝗦𝗧𝗘 has some fabulous footage of this thing like shaking itself apart, bouncing up and down. On this particular occasion, the light just came on, and it comes down in an approach pattern very much like a plane. Now later on, we saw that the object itself had some sort of field around it, but that when the field was turned off, that we could see that it was some type of experimental airplane type object. It had wheels, it had an unusual sort of dart-shaped configuration, and there were lights on the nose and on the back. This object here is what I think is Project Senior Prom, is I think the nuclear platform that's coming in from space.
She's here.
You can fast forward it a little bit.
You said Prom was Aurora.
Yeah, it's all part of it. It's like Aurora, there are different projects underneath the code name of Aurora. Just like Project Red Light has Project Galileo, Project Sidekick, Project Looking Glass. So there are different sub-projects underneath one project. And as I said, I think there are 3 or so different planes. Okay, stop. Now this right here is very impressive because you can see it coming down, and you can see the flare off the video camera that makes it shine like that. But here, probably just because of the way the video camera is set up, it looks very much like a dish or a disc. But there's also a blinking as well, which you can tell that there are strobes or something going on inside this field that it's created. Now here, as the object's landing, right there you can see that the field just went off. And now, unfortunately, because of the big screen projection, it's not... you can't really see it, but it is some sort of experimental, it is some sort of plane. I mean, there are wheels on it, and there's a strobe at the top and at the bottom of this kind of this pointed design. Okay, you can go ahead and fast forward through this. But you can see where the hanger lights also came on there as the object was landing. But that's the first time that, anyway, that Area 51's ever been videotaped. And later on, of course, everybody and their mother's been up there, and And now what I'll show you is actual videotape that we took close up of a ship, and also 3 of the craft actually moving at speed, which were taken from a camera that was literally just set up and just pointed at a section of the sky and was completely unattended. Just keep going through this. This is basically just us here out there. Here's the cops who always were coming by and hassling us and taking our phone numbers and our license plate numbers and driver's licenses and all. At the top of that, you can stop that for a second. Right at the top of that, Bald Mountain, there is a facility at the top of Bald Mountain. You can see right there that little...
You can see right there in the center of the frame is a small white building, which is at the top of Bald Mountain. On the other side is Groom Lake. And there's a helicopter pad where they park Cobra-style helicopters on the other side. And the saucers come up.
Now, getting to know this camera had a 12 times zoom on it with a very high lux. And the next object you're going to see was probably Venus. As I was looking at it in the camera, though, you can turn it up a bit. This is actually kind of funny. We're scanning the sky, basically just looking for something, and there is what I think is Venus, but then when I get real close on it, being the excitable character that I am.
The star in the sky, or the bright star. Holy shit!
Okay, turn it down. I go in and basically what this is that we're looking at a particularly bright star, and that when you're trying to get an object at a distance, what happens is when you focus on the object, the lux on the camera actually gives it that bat wing type appearance to it. But these are what the objects in Belgium look like. They did have that sort of unusual bat wing appearance to them, along with the triangular shaped objects that were in Belgium. So this will just show you a misinterpretation of something because of the fact that the object was pretty much just sitting there and didn't really do anything, but looked like something through a camera that I was just getting used to. You can fast forward it. Now I'll show you what I believe to be the actual ships moving at speed. Go on, fast forward through all that. This didn't do anything. It just kind of sat there, and eventually the clouds moved over it, and we were pretty sure by the end of the night that it was Venus. Okay, now you might have to watch very closely on this rather large screen. It's much easier to take a look at when it's when the resolution. Okay, stop. When the resolution is a little better. What it is that this camera right there, you'll see, is just pointing at the night sky, and you'll see on the 3 objects, you'll see one come down right there. Did you see it? You'll see it repeat a number of times. There's one object. This camera is completely unattended on a tripod. There's another one. And I'm off talking to Ed Griffin, I think, because we saw these blinky lights in the sky, or what looked like meteors. And then I realized that when you point the camera at them and get them on film, the meteors actually hook and appear from out of nowhere. And now, and another unusual factor is that when the objects physically appear, you'll see an unusual grain on the film because it interferes with the electromagnetics of the iron pyrite on the tape. Now, I think it shows it one more time. You'll see one object to the right, which just comes in.
Camera stationary?
Yes. Actually, if you could rewind that part for just a second, I'll talk you through this. The interesting thing is that you'll see one object on the side which just comes in and zips out, another object that comes in at a loop and then makes a step-shaped motion and then cuts to the right, and a third object, and it's very difficult to see in real time but very easy to see in slow motion, is that the third object actually appears from out of what looks to be a hyperspace field, like Bob Lazar talked about, a donut-shaped field. Now you'll see the object, the sequence begins with the object on the right there. Now you'll see it come in from the upper right-hand corner and do a loop. And it comes in right there because you can see and shoots out of the frame. Now can you slow it down? Is that possible to do? You can't? Okay, right there. You see it appear out of a circle? It appears in like a circular shaped field. Okay, it's coming up again. It's coming up again. Now you'll see the next one, you'll see the film actually go grainy as the electromagnetics happen, and you'll see that one right there, shoot out, goes from 0 to about 40,000 miles an hour. Lower left-hand corner, watch. See that? It just appears from out of a hyperspace dimension. Right there. Makes a step, and then it's gone. Looks a lot better when you slow it down, frame by frame.
These are our pilots flying these?
I think.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't been in, I guess these are our disc jockeys, I suppose, and program in the maneuver to be done and then punch in the maneuver. And then the computer would do it because I can't see the human mind thinking that fast. Okay, you can fast forward it a bit, and now here's the close-up. Now these were in the days when the majority of these ships were testing. They would fly very low, 50 to 100 feet or so on the public side of the valley, and literally just bounce their way up the valley. Now this is not the movement of the object. This is me goofing with the tripod on this aspect, because I'm trying to get the tripod screwed in to get this particular object. When I zoom in on the object, you'll see not only the object, but the objects themselves have sort of a reddish-orange corona around the outside of them, and this corona seems to spin or sweep, almost like a rotating beacon. And when you get real close, you'll actually see the field right there. That's a close-up. Now, once again, the bites on either side of it are just because I'm focusing on an object at a distance. This is probably a little more than 3 miles away, maybe 4. Well, it's because of the fact that I'm on infinity on the lens trying to get a close-up of a bright object. But what you can see is you can actually see what looks like clouds passing in front of it. That's the actual rotation of the gravity field around the outside of the ship. Now when you get real close to it, this is the actual movement of the object. When it pulls back, it appears to be a pulsing or blinking light. Now this is as the ship moves. You'll see it move up to the right. And then it drops down onto
on the road.
Turn it down. And then it just drops down. Now here's what's weird is it in slow motion again, which we can't do, it'll just physically reappear in the lower left-hand corner. And in stop action, you can actually see that it is shaped like a dish when it turns to the side. Right here, you'll see it reappear. And then it just drops. Turn it up again. Now what happened was right here is that I got a young lady who was there to work the video camera to point it at this area, and I jumped in my car because this thing looked as though it landed in the middle of the valley. And I actually tear off down the road chasing after this thing to see if I can get a look at whatever it is, or if the light did in fact go out, if it did in fact land in the center of the valley. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, on either side, there was a flat green, a navy, kind of an olive drab green flatbed on one side, and another Bronco on the other side, a dark Bronco with a light bar on the top, and another Bronco up the road. And these things came out from either side of the road, were four-wheeling on either side, pulled in front of me, creating a large dust cloud, spun around in front of me, and then these three vehicles were in front of me with all the lights on, blocking the road. Well, being the obnoxious individual that I am, I stopped my car and leaned out and said, "Hey, get out of the road. What do you guys think you're doing?" And they just sat there with all of the lights on, and I'm sitting there and I'm honking my horn, and then from over the loudspeaker they say, "Turn your car around and go back to the road now." I said, "What? This is a public road. What do you guys? I got my Constitution right here, and it's bulletproof." And and so I get out of the car, and they say, "Stay in your vehicle. Turn the vehicle around. Go back." And as I shut the door and started walking the sum probably from here to about that wall right there, about halfway there, I had these red dots on my chest. And I stopped cold and said, "Hey, I got no problems at all." And they said, "Get in your car, return to your vehicle, get in your car, go back to the road." And I said, "Hey, I got donuts and beer in the car, guys. I got no problems at all." So I got in my car and turned around, and that was really, there's only been twice that these guys really messed with us, well actually 3 times. That was the first time. Another time I was up on the top of the hill during the day taking video. I came down the hill, Doug 𝗪𝗏 stopped me with one of the security patrols, and they confiscated some film out of my camera. Doug 𝗪𝗏 saying, "Well, you're getting off easy because I could impound your car and arrest you, and if you just give me the film, that's okay." I had expected this possibility, so I'd actually taken film of a bunch of drunk people at the Alien the night before and substituted it, so the film was actually in my sock, which is the film that we eventually wound up giving to 𝗪𝗏 Rivera. And another time we were out there, and as a matter of fact, this was almost a year ago to the day, when I was out there with John Lear. And it was the first time I took John up to the top of the hill. Good soul that he is, having the bad leg and everything else, but we went to the top of the hill. The Delta Force guys accused us of crashing their fence and knocking down a Joshua tree, and we're trying to send us up on federal charges for knocking over a Joshua tree. Do you know it's a federal offense to knock over a Joshua tree? And when Doug 𝗪𝗏 showed up, these guys wouldn't even get out of their car. When the sheriff showed up, we said, "We've been sitting here all night. You can see by the tracks in the snow that we haven't moved an inch from where we are. And you can see by the truck that nothing's happened to the front of the truck." And these guys claimed apparently that we'd gone up the road, smashed into the fence, were verbally abusive to somebody, and then knocked over a Joshua tree and supposedly escaped into the night. And 𝗪𝗏, getting sick and tired of these guys, because I think the sheriffs are just as sick of these Delta goons as we are, basically just told him to go home, and he wasn't going to do anything about it. And I see the military's point of view as well. I mean, this is supposedly a top secret military installation. It's the most secret above ground installation that they have. And you've got guys like me running around up there taking pictures of things that could, in fact, basically do something to national security. The other time that it occurred was Norio Hayakawa. And Norio was up there with 6 Japanese nationals, not one of which spoke English. And they were up on that hill looking down on the base with all kinds of camera and video equipment. And they have these hunter's ears, so they can listen to you from, I mean, they listen to your conversations from inside the trucks. They point these ears at you, and they can hear you from probably a good 10 miles away. And there have been occasions where we've said things up there on the hill, and the cops have come up later and quoted our conversation to us, where we were joking about having a night scope, as an example. And a cop came up when 𝗪𝗏 got there about half an hour later, said, "You guys have a night scope?" We said, "No." how would you think we had a night scope? Well, yeah, that's classified, I can't tell you. And so what he was doing was when he was coming down off the hill, he had 6 Japanese nationals with him, none of whom were citizens, looking down on a, you know, they were all foreign nationals looking down on a top secret U.S. military installation. So they confiscated their stuff. If I was them, I'd do the same thing. That's the only other incident that I know of that actually happening. See, now that we've gone to the sheriff, what I actually did is I took a map and I went to the sheriffs before I went out there. And I said, I'm going to go here. Is this legal? And they said, fine. And I asked their permission before I did it, and they said, don't go across this line or we'll have to do something about it. So when they get a call from the base saying that there was someone, quote, challenging our borders, unquote, the sheriffs will either say, we know who it is, he's come and talked to us, he's hiking in the hills, he has every right to do it, we don't feel like coming out there. Or they will come out and simply say, you know, hey, how you guys doing? Don't bother the cows, etc. So that's about it. I don't think the security there is that good. I think anybody, and a couple of friends of George Knapp's have actually done this, can just walk on the base, depending on how far you're willing to walk. And but no, it's never happened to me once.
Do you think they would shoot to kill if you got over the line?
No.
Okay.
I think they would turn you into the sheriffs because they don't do anything. They don't do anything like that. Depending on how far in you got, they would probably corral you, handcuff you, and turn you into the sheriff. I know a couple of guys that have gone over the line or actually gone past the signs, and they drag them out of the car and they throw them on their faces, and you sit there like this on your knees for a while until the sheriff gets there, and everything is handled by the sheriff. Other than that, you know, the security guys, they've never. With the exception of that one time I was chasing after that object, they've never physically spoken to me. They will run away from you if you chase them. If you're on the public side and you get out of your car and you walk towards their truck, they'll run.
Is it true that the guard shack is behind on their property, so that if you walk up the guard shack, you're already trespassing by the time you get there?
Yes.
So they can arrest you then?
Yes. So if you go past the signs, which are clearly posted on either side. There hasn't been a whole lot of activity at 51 as far as the ships go because of the fact that the military has had non-stop war games up there for 3 months now. I mean, gearing up for something somewhere. And so when we went up in both October and the last part of September, they had almost a solid month's worth of what they call red flag and green flag operations. Interestingly enough, I'm not sure if you folks can see this, but this is from Red Flag Air Combat for the 80s by Michael Skinner. And this in essence shows, it's out of print now, but this in essence shows the entire Area 51 base. And you can see the part that's lined right here is called Dreamland. Now this book is out of print. And one of the interesting things about the book is that it actually physically states in the book that since Coyote Range is not a military operating area, there are spots the players must be careful not to overfly too fast or too low. North of the Sally Corridor is the Farragut National Wildlife Refuge, and the towns of Alamo and Crystal Springs, usually nothing more than a couple of ranches and a post office. More in the way, at the western part of Coyote North, near the entrance to the ranges are, quote, the farms, unquote, green discs of irrigated land that stand out prominently against the perpetually brown desert. Quote, it's about the only thing that's growing out there, says one pilot. And Rachel, a town too small to be on the map, but not too small to complain about sonic booms rattling the windows of the mobile homes. Now listen to this quote. This is what's interesting. Actual live bombing is done only on the numbered ranges. Dropping live ordnance on the live citizens underneath the military operating areas or on the Dreamland Munchkins is not allowed. This is what it says in this book, the Dreamland Munchkins. The range that have a name, EC East and EC West, Tolochai Peak, EW, Paiute Mesa, also have people in them. People in them, mind you. These are areas that are supposedly not populated. But it says that Paiute Mesa, Tolochai Peak, EW have people in them, so no bombing is allowed there. One other interesting instance, too, and this is something that I want to double check with anybody that's actually spent the night out at Area 51. When I was out there in September and again in October, I fell asleep between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. And on both occasions, I had these horrific dreams. I had dreams of literally being abducted and being probed and having aliens do all kinds of nasty things to me, to the point of where I woke up as the moon was rising over the eastern horizon. It was a sliver, and it looked like an instrument coming at me, and I woke up in a shock to realize that I was the only person awake, that everybody else was asleep also. And this happened to me on 2 occasions. Now, the strange thing about this is that the last time we were out there, which was the beginning of November, we went up to our little campsite, and there were some very paranoid guys at the top of the campsite. They were guys there with an AK-47 and a guy with like a .44 auto mag in his belt, and these guys are going, "You're security, we know you guys are spies." And I said, "No, man, I work for Unsolved Mysteries, I'm cool. And so these guys are basically just sitting there, you know, holding their guns out saying, "Well, we think you guys are spies." And I said, "Well," and I gave them a beer and some bananas, and, you know, it calmed them down. But without mentioning it to these individuals, they said, "Well, you know what happens, don't you, is that the military comes by, these trucks come by, and they've got some sort of odorless gas which knocks you out between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. And that's when they do the experiments. And apparently they pick you up and they do stuff, and you have wild dreams about aliens." And I thought, wait a minute, I hadn't told these guys this, and I'd had these same dreams twice. So it's just another thing that I just want to throw out there. I have no proof for this. It was probably just my active imagination. But to hear this coming from someone else, and to have actually had the experience myself of being asleep between 3 and 5, and then having these dreams, and then having someone else correlate that information or corroborate, was pretty interesting. Another unusual happening that goes on out there is that there is a cone of light that appears up and down the valley that irradiates certain sections. Now this cone probably is about as high as the ceiling here, and it starts in a ring, and it just comes down, and it just does this. And it'll go on for about a 2 to 3 second interval, and you'll just see these cones of light that go up and down the valley. Now we don't know if it's not coming out of an object. The only thing I can think of is that maybe this is, when I explained that to John Lear, John was saying, well, maybe it's part of the Project Sidekick, where they can actually aim a weapon on the base up into a gravity lens, and that it actually comes out the other side anywhere they want it to. So they can pretty much sit up on Bald Mountain, shoot this arrow into the air, so to speak, and then track where it actually beams, usually with a harmless bright white light, comes up into it and then comes out in these cones. But we saw these happening all around the valley, and it happened right over us on 2 occasions. Just as a hint for anybody that wants to go UFO watching, you can send to the U.S. Geological Survey for what's called an electromagnetic map of the United States. And they will show you areas that are high densities of positive, negative electromagnetic areas. My advice is for anybody that wants to go UFO hunting is that you should go, usually February and April are the 2 best months for everything from Gulf Breeze to Area 51. February and April are the 2 hottest months, Wednesday nights between 8 p.m. and 1 a.m., and go to places that are particularly either where UFOs have been seen in the past or areas that are particularly dense in electromagnetic distortion, which you can get, as I said, you can get the maps from USGS, and they're like $5 for the whole United States. Hit the tape. Hit the tape. Now, I can't vouch for this particularly, but this is supposedly a Nippon television special of an interview with Thomas C. Thomas C. acted as a security guard inside the Dulce Archuleta Mesa. He is basically explaining the fact that this is a section. Actually, if you want to rewind it, just a portion. He is where a lot of what they call the Dulce papers come from. Rewind it to right here. This is his ID card.
That indeed there is something in Dulce, and that the Dulce papers were indeed authentic.
This is 𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗓 𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗓 translating. This is a drawing of one of the alien tanks.
He's explaining how the Dulce papers came about. That there is some kind of a genetic laboratory over there, laboratory over there. I'm going to
These are drawings that were provided by Thomas C. of the actual growth process of the aliens, that supposedly the aliens were grown in these tubes. These vats were being used to provide them with food. This whole wall was somehow part of the experiment, and this is the actual tape that was taken by a security camera. The security camera moves back and forth over a particular area, and this is supposed to be a section of 6 minutes of video which show in those bags there. That is supposed to be the breeding bags where the aliens are grown to the size of about a human hand, and then they're placed inside a much larger sack that's filled with a sort of ambionic fluid and then grown to size. Now this could conceivably either be the aliens doing this themselves or us actually cloning a sort of like bio-robots, almost like So yeah, well, like cyborgs, they were just very easily controllable. Since the Greys seem to have some sort of hive mind, there's the possibility the military's hooked into the actual signal of how to control them, and so they're just like little biological robots.
It shows ETs walking around.
See, here's the weird part about it. He says that in the 6-minute section of the tape, that not only does it show that section of the wall, but that it also shows the ETs walking around and checking the various apparatus. Now, why they didn't show that, I have no idea. This is a rather ingenious recreation by the Japanese of that piece of footage, where you can see the proper colors, the purplish violet glow.
品のコピーを持ち、今逃げている男を直接知っているという人物を彼は教えてくれた。
That's pretty much it. Very controversial. I haven't had a chance to talk to 𝗩𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗘 Yahweh or Charles Yahweh about this particular footage. I'm not sure if it's genuine or legitimate. George Knapp had a section of it in his video, UFOs, the best evidence, but we still don't know where it comes from. Well, once again, Bob says to wrap it up here, so let me simply say that there is the only cause is humanity, the only religion is love, and the only thought is of His omnipresence. So thank you so much for listening to me. I very much appreciate it.